Hey there, Fletcher from All Things Overlanding here. Today I'm going to be talking about pickup trucks versus SUVs for overlanding. So if you have a current vehicle and you're kind of thinking of upgrading, or if you haven't bought a vehicle yet and you're trying to figure out what would be a good first vehicle for you, truck versus SUV, this should be a great episode for you. So stay tuned for more on that. Alright guys, so as I mentioned, today I'm talking about pickup truck versus SUV for overlanding, right? What are the pros and cons of each one? What are sort of the use cases where they make the most sense, each one? And then kind of what are my final thoughts and what would be my recommendations as far as which one you should choose for your setup based on what kind of trips you want to take and what your loadout looks like. So let's start with the pros and cons of each. And I'm going to start with pickup truck. So I currently have a pickup truck, and it is a 2008 Nissan Frontier, and I like a lot of things about this truck. Previously, I had a Nissan Xterra, and I'm going to get into that one, the pros and cons of SUVs here in a second. So I'm going to kind of compare those two, but the same applies for pretty much any make, right? Any SUV or truck that you get are going to have these same benefits and maybe cons. So, pros of a pickup truck. Obviously, you get all this extra storage space. Also, generally, a higher payload. So trucks are generally rated to haul more stuff. So if you've got a lot of gear like a rooftop tent, like a spare tire and a swing out, a lot of armor and bumpers and things like that, then the truck is going to give you a higher payload so that you can carry more stuff. Also, there are a lot of pros around being able to carry gear. So with an SUV, you're kind of limited on the stuff that you can fit in there. And when you run out of space, it's the roof or like a trailer, right? Whereas with a truck, if you kind of run out of space inside the cab, up on top of a bed rack and stuff, you've still got your bed where you can put a deck system or put storage boxes like a Plano crate, things like that to store gear. So another pro that could also be a con and will kind of lead us into the cons is that you've got outdoor storage, right? So if you've got firewood that you want to pick up, if you've got dirty recovery gear, things like that, you can just toss it in the back of a truck versus in an SUV worrying about destroying your carpet or destroying the inside of your vehicle. Another pro of a truck is that you have a lot of configurability options, right? With an SUV, you've kind of got your interior and you could maybe sleep in the vehicle, or you could do like a rooftop tent, or then you could do your normal ground tent or hammock type camping, right? With a truck, you can do a truck cap with a rooftop tent on top. You could do a bed rack with a lot of stuff being able to be attached to it, and then a rooftop tent on top or other options. You could tow a trailer. Again, the towing rating generally on a truck is going to be higher than an SUV. So if you wanted to haul a bigger sort of teardrop or something like that, it's going to be a lot easier to do with a truck, especially off-road. But that also, there could be some cons to that too, right? So going into cons of a truck, the open space in the bed. Like for me right now, I have a bed rack and it's nice, but everything in the bed gets dirty. So if it's dusty out, everything's gonna be covered in dust. All your bins, all your food, all your diesel heater, whatever you've got, all of your gear is gonna get covered in dust. Snow, rain, sleet, whatever the case may be, because it's in the bed of the truck and it's not enclosed versus like an SUV, it's gonna get dirty, muddy, yucky, wet, whatever. So you do have to be cognizant of that. You do need to make sure that you've got proper storage bins that are gonna be waterproof or dust proof so that your stuff doesn't get ruined. Another con to a pickup truck is just, again, lack of enclosed space, right? Because I am in a pickup truck, even though mine's a quad cab, I only have a little bit of room. So I do have a slide out fridge in my back seat, which is really, really nice, but it takes up 2/3 of my back seat. So I can basically only take myself and 2 people in my truck because I had to sort of sacrifice some of my interior storage in the truck in exchange for more gear storage, right? And as a result, then more of my gear has to go on the outside of the truck. So then I have to waterproof it. I have to buy additional storage equipment to be able to keep that stuff waterproofed and dust-proofed on the outside of the truck. But other than that, I think that there are a lot of pros to having a pickup truck. So let's go into pros and cons of SUVs now. Basically, they're almost going to be mirrors of the truck, right? So you do have the enclosed space, so you do have more enclosed space. So like in my old setup, I had room for like 4 people in my SUV, and I had a fridge, and I had a whole drawer system in the back, and it was all enclosed. I could pull up to the grocery store, lock my vehicle, everything's inside the vehicle. I don't have to worry about people walking away with stuff that are in the bed of my truck or strapped to the bed rack. So there's a little bit more security with an SUV, but also then it is a finite amount of space versus a lot more capability to store stuff in like a pickup truck. So like in my SUV, when I had my drawer system built out, I had my fridge in it and all that stuff. it was tight. Like if I wanted to take my kids with me, I oftentimes wouldn't have enough room for all of the tent, sleeping bags, pillows, all the stuff that I needed for additional campers. So it was kind of a one-person vehicle at that point when it came to overlanding and camping. But again, having that interior storage is really, really nice. From a capability standpoint, in my case, the Xterra to the Frontier are pretty similar vehicles. I would say my Frontier is a little bit more capable, but mainly that's because of the modifications that are done to this truck versus my old truck. But I still think, like, from a default standpoint, they're both very similar, right? So cons of the SUV then too would be no exterior storage, right? So again, if you have muddy gear, if you have wet gear, if you have stuff that you need to throw in the vehicle that's gross, gasoline if you're carrying extra gas and stuff, if you don't have a way to, like a swing out bumper or something with jerry can mounts, then you're gonna have to store that stuff inside the truck, which is a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more messy, potential to make a mess inside your vehicle, right? So that could be a con as well. But so those were kind of the pros and cons of truck versus SUV. So next, let's get into what kind of setups make the most sense for each of these types of vehicles. You know, I think a lot of the times you could make the argument that both could be equally good for like a solo style versus like a family style. Ultimately, a lot of people would say like a large SUV is going to be best for families because like you could get something like a Nissan Armada or a Chevy Suburban or something like that that could seat 8. And if you have a larger family, 2, 3, 4 kids plus you, your wife, maybe a dog or two, then a bigger SUV is probably going to be best just to keep everyone out of the elements and to keep your stuff secure and safe inside of it. And in a lot of those cases, you could still put a good size rooftop tent on it or pull a trailer. I would also argue that for someone that goes solo a lot like myself, that an SUV makes a lot of sense because like a truck with a bed cap, you could sleep inside of it, but the cost is a lot lower on an SUV because you're not paying all that additional tax to buy some sort of like a wedge style or habitat style camper to go on the back or a cap with a rooftop tent on top of it. That's a lot of extra expense, whereas with an SUV you kind of get that all built in. So you could make the argument that a solo one would make sense or like a bigger SUV would make sense for a family. If you're more of like a tent camper or a hammock camper, that kind of thing, either one makes sense, and it's kind of up to your personal preference as far as how much gear you're going to take. That's going to be one of the biggest variables in your decision making is how much stuff do you want to take? Does it need to be inside? Does it need to be stored? Or do you have a way to store it externally to the truck? Do you spend a lot of time like picking up firewood, throwing recovery gear in the back? Are you wheeling a little bit more hard because then maybe a truck makes a little bit more sense? There's just pros and cons to both, right? So it's really going to depend on a lot of variables as far as how many people you're taking, how much gear you've got, what kind of camper you are. If you are a rooftop tent person and you need, you know, the extra capacity to be able to carry that like a truck could provide over an SUV, that may be a good option for you. So it just kind of comes down to what type of camping you're going to do. As far as which one I would recommend in which situation, again, I've had an Xterra and I've gone predominantly by myself, and most of the back of my SUV was taken up with gear. So for me, that was a really good setup as a solo person. I've also seen a lot of really cool setups where people sleep inside their vehicles or build platforms inside their vehicles, particularly SUVs because of the extra space. And I think that's a really cool way to essentially turn your car into a camper if you can do that, if you have the ability to do it without compromising your ability to take your family around. So as long as you're not going to, like, you know, make your spouse super angry because you got rid of all the seats in the car and built a platform back there, then an SUV could be a really good option for like stealth camping, for solo overlanding, things like that. If you're a little bit more hardcore wheeling and you want to get more into the off-road stuff and you want to carry a bunch of gear, then a truck may be a better option. And that could be whether you're a family or not, right? Now again, those limitations of a truck mean that you may not be able to take a truck with a big family unless you have like a big full size with a big back seat and tons of room in there where you can get all your kids and dogs and all that sort of stuff. But those get more expensive, right? So it just kind of, there's a lot of factors that go into it. So ultimately, I think that, you know, there are a lot of variables that go into it, but you need to think about how much gear you need to carry, what kind of camping you want to do, rooftop tent, hammock, ground, camper style, inside the vehicle, and then kind of make your decision based on the total of all the gear that you have to carry, the number of people and or pets that you want to take with you, and then what kind of stuff you want to tackle. Do you want to tow a trailer? Get a truck. Do you want to go camping solo and do some stealth stuff? Get an SUV, right? Now there are other options, right? There are vans. A lot of people want to do like more like suburban stealth camping and things like that. There are vans. There are cars. You know, they're not as great, but like a Subaru and stuff, those things can be super capable. So again, you may not choose either of these options, but if you're looking at these two specifically, hopefully that gave you a little bit of like opinionated information. right? So if it was helpful, click that like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to click the subscribe button. I put out a couple videos every week, so there's tons of content here for especially newbie overlanders. Also in the description down below will be links to all my social channels, so if you want to hang out on any of those, I'd love to have you. Also in the description are links to the Patreon group. There's a really cool group of a bunch of us that kind of hang out. We have a Discord, and we do like a once a month kind of hang out and drink a beer and talk about our setups and trips and things like that. So if you want to be part of that, click through the Patreon link down below. And then last but not least, the Newbie Overlanders group. Facebook group, totally free to join. Almost 12,000 people at the time that I recorded this. So it's growing really fast, but we're also different from the big groups where you're going to get, just demolished if you ask a question that's kind of a newbie question, right? So come join that group. We'd love to have you as well. But again, thanks for watching. Thanks so much for subscribing. Appreciate you guys, and we will see you guys next time.